is Rafaela, and this is Street Smarts. I'm on the streets of Amsterdam today to record not only one, but two episodes of Street Smarts. We're gonna do two parts of this episode today because actually my guest not only went through a burnout, is going to talk about her experience, but she's also super knowledgeable on the topic of DEI. And one thing she told me was, have you ever noticed that DEI, if you change the letters, also is DIE? Is it really the end of DEI? Is there something that we women of color and minorities can still do? The sentiment is not so great right now. So Maxine Penney is my guest today. She's gonna join me here in the streets because this knowledge should not be in a confined room, but really to get to as many people as possible. And I want you to also watch out for the signs of burnout. The stresses that you're going through in your life, are they actually signs for you to slow down, to change things in your life, or maybe also to set different boundaries? I'm gonna sit on that bench and just wait for Maxine to come and join me. Is this the first time of sitting on a bench after the long winter we've had for you?
Yes, I can't believe the sun's so beautiful. I love it. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for joining me. I'd like to tackle two very big topics with you. First, I think will be, actually both will be about your experience, but also your knowledge on it, what I call your street smarts on the topic.
Yeah.
But the first one is deeply personal because it's also your experience going through a burnout. And when we were chatting, you alluded to this concept of a burnout not being only a one-time thing, but also being a phases situation. How was your experience? How did it happen for you? And how did you come to this understanding?
Yes, I mean, thanks for speaking on such an important topic. I think it's so good to share experiences because that's how we learn. And I think for me, it was when I was growing up in the UK, my mother was constantly like, you have to work really hard. You're already going to be sort of set aside because you're different, which I didn't understand really when I was younger. I was just like, if you work hard, that's kind of it. But when I worked in London in the city, you just kind of get on with things. You don't really see the system behind it. And it wasn't until I moved to Amsterdam, actually, that, cultural shifts and cultural changes, you start to understand yourself a little bit better, but also situations change. So as an expat working for big, corporate companies here, the headquarters in Amsterdam, there's lots of different, American colleagues that come in. And so the culture is very different. So at the beginning, I didn't realize my first burnout because it was only until years later, until my final burnout. I don't know if it's my final one. I hope so.
We're not.
And we'll talk about that as later, about these phases. But I think my initial one was that I just was very stressed, but I didn't know what stress was. And, I started to cry at work.
Wow.
I wanted to work harder.
Yeah.
I started to stop my social life because I wanted to focus only on work. And I kind of asked for help, but I didn't know what help to be asking for. I went to the, human resources and they were just like, work harder. So I was very confused. And it wasn't until after the situation, because you just then get another job. There's no time to stop. There's no time to evaluate, especially when you're an independent person. You don't have financial help. You're in another country. You're on your own, essentially.
Was that your solution at that moment, to change jobs so I can change my context and things should get better?
I mean, so I'd been in that role as an executive assistant for 13 years, and it served me really well. I'd never had any complaints. I'd always had outstanding reviews, and it wasn't until this job the person in question who said that they were trying to redirect me was saying that I wasn't very good at my job. So I kind of had been implanted this mind bug that I wasn't very good at my job. And so I was curious to look elsewhere. But there is a sort of entrepreneurial spirit I've always had, this creative spirit.
Yeah.
And so working in a lot of corporates was kind of the only thing that you could do, especially where I was from in the UK. It was, you become an assistant, you become an executive assistant. and it supports you financially. But, also I was good at it. But there was also something I was like, could there be more? So again, sometimes maybe burnouts or these situations happens to redirect you.
Yeah, I heard that actually from a couple of people that they say, I'm not happy that the burnout happened, but it did make me change things and do something about my situation.
Yeah, silver lining in a bad situation.
Yes.
However, I'm not saying that's allowed to happen, because that's, I didn't know I was going through a burnout. There was people in the company already going through burnouts, but they were much older. There was a stigma also around burnout. No one knew what burnout was from the UK, because you work 5 days a week. But here, there's 4 days a week. There's Mama and Papa Dag, in Dutch. And so you're also stuck in between a culture where you're like, but I'm working 5 days a week and putting in loads of time, and other people are not essentially doing that. And so it's quite confusing.
I would like to come back to this topic of you didn't know what stress was and how we don't get prepared to actually, like at school. It's not about just doing your homework, showing up, studying, and you do the test, and then so to say you're done. At work, there's so many other things, and we might just go to work and think, starting our career, thinking, if I just work hard and I get all the assignments and I do my to-do list and I check all of those out, this means that actually I will have a happy upwards progression. When we find out, oh, it's much more complicated than that. And though that's not only a task list, it's the stress that is imposing on us. So how, not understanding even what stress was, how did you come then to realizing this?
Yeah, because what is stress? I mean, you see it in the movies. You might hear someone in a high-powered job, a lawyer, or, someone that works in the financial industry, for instance, and you think, well, that's not going to happen to me. Stress creeps in, and it's often prolonged, and so I think for me in that particular situation, my father was sick and I lived in a different country and I couldn't get home, and I felt guilty that I was worried about this work thing. And so the stress that I put on myself, that guilt, was that I was, I shouldn't be feeling this bad. It's just work. Then, you're in another country on your own. Of course, you're making friends, you're making new friends, but people don't know you intrinsically, like people from back home, perhaps, or people that you've grown up with. So there's also that stress of masking. I'm okay. I mean, who do you tell? Do you tell people at work? You don't want to be seen to be weak or that you're complaining.
Yeah.
It's about trust, Do you trust that person enough to say, I'm struggling?
And the first people you went to was actually HR, and then you got that comment that just work harder?
Yeah, actually, I went to one of my colleagues, and, because they would find me crying around the back of the building. Yeah. And they actually suggested for me to go to HR and just say, look, because what happened was I didn't learn how to say no. I didn't know my own boundaries, right? So I had one manager, then they gave me 2. I was doing such a good job. Then they gave me 3. Then they gave me 4. Then I was traveling, and then I was doing all these projects, and I was just saying yes to all these things. And eventually that was kind of the breaking point, which is I can't do this anymore. But I also didn't tell anyone no.
Because you also wanted to do a career shift, right? So you were like, oh, I already worked this 13 years. Now if I just can give a little bit more,
I was excited. Yeah, exactly. The pressure you put on yourself. So eventually they said, go to HR, and they did say, just work harder. And I just felt very betrayed,
Of course,
I really didn't understand. I was so confused because I thought that HR were there to support and to protect, but actually I found out that it's more that they are considered to protect the policies and the structures in place.
Yeah, it's a tough one. We sometimes need somebody to just have the empathetic ears and eyes and really talk to us human to human.
Yes. And I'm not, I eventually ended up working in HR because from this situation, I was like, that's it. I'm going to start my own HR company. I'm going to create something new. I don't know how I'm going to do it in a new country. But I mean, and again, I was redirected. I have a very diverse background of being called many things. I've done many things, but eventually, and working with HR to create, acceptance and create these structures in place that are good for you, like the code of conduct. How
Oh,
do
wow.
you, you know, how do you create a safe environment? How do you focus on mental health?
Yeah.
I realized that they're also under so much pressure. They're
Mhm.
also on the brink
Exactly.
of burnout. They're
Mm.
also have so much pressure from the company to perform these statistics and these data. So it's not that anyone's in the wrong. I think it's that these institutions are built, and that's what I found out, that I didn't really fit into these institutions.
And that was a realization for you to change.
Yeah.
Was this, let me just understand the timeline a little bit. You had those 13 years working as an executive assistant, and then you wanted to do this change in the midst of the burnout. The burnout came right after?
Um, no, it was I did the 13 years. I moved to Amsterdam.
Oh,
I had
right.
one job before, and that started my journey about self-awareness into unconscious
Uh-huh.
bias,
Oh, I see.
into what we now call diversity, equity, and
Can we talk
inclusion.
later?
We'll talk
Yeah.
later. But it opened my eyes, and I had to go on a personal journey
I
about
see.
that. So that's what sparked my interest. But at the same time, I wanted a more creative role.
Yeah.
So the person from my previous job, I must say, she was a really good, manager and boss, and a confidant. She was like, right, I'm going to help you
We need
go in
those
this
people.
direction. Yeah. And she changed my life. And I don't know if she still knows it, but I still put those things into practice that she taught me.
Whenever you can be that one person that will be the mentor, that will be the helper, that will be, hey, I've been through this. This is actually what's happening. That makes such a difference in
It
our
makes a
lives.
huge difference. Yeah. I mean, we need those people. And that's why I think we can all be leaders. Not just a manager, we can all be leaders, and we
That's a
can
good
take
one.
our own radical responsibility and make changes, because it should come from the top, but it also should come from the bottom.
Absolutely.
But we should be supported so that there is that, safety there. And everyone's constantly talking about a safe space, but it is about, owning your space and what can you do with it.
You mentioned that you worked for big corporations. You had colleagues from different walks of lives and also different cultures. And this thing we both have heard, the lazy Europeans, they just
Yes.
wake up at 8, go to work at 9, and then they stop at 5, and they don't want to answer any emails afterwards. If there is a super big deadline, they might not be working. Of course, stereotypes. But how did you then navigate it? Coming also from the UK and having such a high pressure working environment there, I believe.
Yes.
Working with American people who tend to be, time is money.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
It was a culture shock. I mean, everyone says if we're so close, the UK to Holland, everyone speaks English here. But the working, way of life, it really shocked me. And
In a good way.
In a good way,
Yeah.
because I was like, wow, I never knew, which is why it's great to move to another country, right?
Yeah.
So I never knew that work-life balance could be so easy. But at the beginning, I was really scared that I would lose my job, because in the UK, if you don't do what your boss tells you to do, or, even if you're in customer service, in hospitality, any kind of role where you're serving, or you are, an employee, if you don't, hit your targets, you will be fired.
Yes, yeah.
And so here I was like, this person said no, and they're walking out at 5. Shock. And then, nothing happened to them. They were in the office the next day, and I'm like, wow. So
They said no to, for example, having an
for
additional
example,
task.
my boss came in and asked me to do a presentation. It was like 5:30, and I said, yeah, of course. So I'm sitting there, and I start to create a presentation. And I was sitting opposite a girl, and her boss came in from the other way. And her boss said, can you also do this for me before you go?
Yeah.
And she said, no, I'm going to do it tomorrow when I get in. And she was like, okay, see you tomorrow. And she packed up her stuff and left. And I was like, what? Oh, it really did confuse me. And I was like, and the thing is, I didn't resent staying there, because it was my choice, and I was really excited about this project. But it did teach me that you are allowed to say no without consequences. Or so you think sometimes, because if we go into the intersectionality of being different, sometimes those things change. Yeah.
That's very true. Let's get to that.
Yes, yeah.
One thing I just remembered as well was my first time of realizing that no is a thing.
Yeah.
For us as Brazilians, is actually very big. We don't know how to say no. If somebody invites you to do something, invite a Brazilian to go to your birthday party, or just go with you to a restaurant, we will not find ways to say no. We might have like the biggest thing happening that day, but we just cannot. So we will say, oh yeah, let's keep in touch. Oh yeah, I'll come back to you. Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you. And then might not reply.
Yes.
Just because of the fear of the saying no.
I mean, that's what I learned living here. It's very much like British culture, the 16 layers of Britishness. You don't want to say no. You don't want to, there's so many things around the British culture that also the Dutch think are either rude or like they're not upfront. I mean, we can say things in both ways, but I like the kind of clear communication.
Yes, absolutely. And it's nice to also say no or say things that are different to the other person's opinion in a nice way. It doesn't mean that you have to be rude. So like you said, there are nuances there. But the moment I learned how to say no was when my colleague at another job, we were using this tool, and the tool had a very poor user experience layout. So they, by accident, clicked on the wrong button, and it made a huge mistake. And it was this big thing. And then what they did, they just said, you know what? I'm not working with this tool anymore. From now on, I do not work with this tool. And for me, it was so shocking because this was the tool that we paid for, that the company paid for, that all of us learned how to use, that is just almost like the way it is.
Yeah.
There is no other way. And then I understood, whoa, you can be so assertive to say, look, this was my mistake, yes. I take ownership for it, but it's because this tool is so bad that this also happened. And I am myself not using this tool.
Yeah. Saying no at the right time is so powerful. And
At the right time.
At
That's
the
a
right
good one.
time, because I think, especially when I was sort of experiencing the burnout, I started to say no to friends, going out with friends, no to, I feel like we should break oppression with joy. Like
that's beautiful.
Yeah,
break
right?
oppression with joy.
Break
Tell
oppression
me
with
about
joy.
it.
Because we often try to introvert and solve things and go deeper, but actually that's not the answer. I think it is to look at other avenues of releasing your creativity, spending time with your friends and family, being open, because when you close, that's when you start to feel alone. When you don't talk and say, this has happened to me, that's when you feel alone. Even if you don't know what's happening, like I said, I didn't know what a burnout was, but I knew something was going on. I felt, my body felt it. And then it started to come out in the ways that I, approach people. And I started to isolate quite a lot in terms of saying no to social events, saying no to other things so I could focus only on work and making that the best, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get into the office before everyone else so that I could also finish late so that, I could prove myself. So it's often also about self-worth.
However, if you're trying to prove so much and then you don't have the recognition of somebody else because you didn't understand yet that we shouldn't be relying or dependent on that can crush you.
Yes. I actually did a workshop shortly afterwards. So when I left, I was like, what am I going to do? Who am I going to be? Where? This is a sign. Which direction am I going to go into?
Oh, nice.
And they were asking, what's your biggest insecurity? And I was like, I don't know what that is. And so they asked all these questions. And as I was filling it out, this situation at work came up. And my biggest insecurity was this fear of judgment. And I was like, wow, that's so confronting.
And so you didn't know that before, and then you did this?
Yeah. And the thing is, it came because I wanted to be validated. Yes. I wanted someone to say, you've done a good job, because I'd always heard that. But who's to say? Maybe I wasn't in the right job. We also hold on to these ideas of ourselves and get stuck, which is why I think sometimes maybe it's a redirection.
And how you grew up as well, with your mom telling you have to work twice as hard because of who you are. There's also no real measurement of what is twice as hard. So if you don't get that extra, oh yes, this is amazing, this is wonderful, then how will you know that actually this is working, right?
Exactly. And whose standards are that? Yeah. Are they your colleagues? You see your colleagues getting praise, but you're not getting praise. You see that, people, getting promotions. Maybe you're not getting a promotion. Maybe you're stuck. So you're like, I'm trying so hard, but nothing's happening.
Yeah. Phases of burnout.
Yes.
So you had several realizations of things that were happening in your life and you were like, okay, this is a burnout. Do you think that you went through 1-2 phases, and instead of tackling the whole thing, you just we just keep surviving,
Yeah,
we just
just
keep
keep
on
going,
going,
just do it.
just do it.
Yeah.
And on the third instance, is that when it hits you, but you think it's like an accumulation, right?
I think it's an accumulation. So this first instance, I think it was like, early stages. So you kind of just get over it. You kind of just think, okay, I'm going to get on with it. So like I said, maybe you're not financially stable, or you don't know you've gone through it. So you just get on with it. And I remember just focusing on then getting this new role, this new life, this new experience. And so you're focused on that, and then you get into that experience, but you're not 100%. So you're already tired before you get into the next experience.
Okay.
And then maybe something happens in that experience, but you're also, maybe there's a toxic colleague or a bad boss, and you're like, how is this happening to me again? And also you're like, I'm not the victim. I don't want to victimize myself. Nothing's wrong. And if you also don't hear people around you saying it, you start to be like, there's something wrong with me.
But this is why we have to talk about this topic, so that no one feels like, oh, if I speak up, I am victimizing myself, because clearly the others are managing somehow.
Yeah.
So how am I not to? So I'm making myself the victim. I'm making the whole world about myself. And especially if you were an empathetic person,
yes, then
somehow the empathy goes towards the others, and we lack this empathy towards ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, empaths are, I'm an empath, and I was always like, I'm emotionally intelligent. What does that mean? But I take on other people. I can feel other people's energies. I want to make sure that everyone's safe. I want to make sure everyone feels understood. That's kind of my purpose in life, which is to give people that what I might not have necessarily felt growing up, which is safety and understanding and support. So that also takes a toll if you don't know your boundaries and how to say no to yourself. And that's why I think sometimes burnout can also be in relationships. Everything is a relationship with work, with your manager, with friends. But, there are certain situations where some people can take a lot of energy from you. And if you don't say no, you also can be burnt out. You also can be irritable, lose, sort of emotional connection with them, feel like you don't want to be in that sort of surroundings. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Any other symptoms that you had, Maxine, that can help others maybe also spot these things?
Yeah, so I think it's chronic stress. So again, it's so subtle. It's that kind of, there's a feeling that you're like, something's not okay, but I'll just keep going. So I think maybe sometimes it starts with sleep.
Okay.
Maybe before you go to bed, your mind's racing, or you wake up in the middle of the night, or when you wake up, you're already in a state of kind of stress. Like, okay, I'm gonna do this today. Not motivated, but like stressed. And I think if that continues, and then maybe some other things happen, it could be a relationship breakdown. It could be you have to move, or, it could be multiple things. Someone's sick, or you're a caregiver or caretaker for someone. Then for me personally, it was like I was very irritable. Like I couldn't really take a lot, I couldn't really, I didn't have a lot of patience. So if I'm cycling, and someone comes to me, I was like bike rage, not motivation. Yeah, exactly. But, that was usually on the way to work. So I was already stressed. Yes. And I'm like, why am I stressed going to work? Like either I should have left earlier, or, like I shouldn't be so bothered by the fact that someone just stopped in front of me,
I learned a concept for that that helped me in that specific situation. It was about our own monitor. So basically, we set as a goal in our mind, I just have to get this done. But sometimes that goal that we set is just so unachievable, or so not depending on yourself. So if we're stuck on traffic, for example, I just want to get home. I just want to get there. So anyone who comes in front of me, either you're on a bike or in a car, it will disrupt that. And your monitor will be stressed out because you're not achieving that goal that you set for yourself.
Yes, high achievers. Might be an empath, but high achievers. And that is, again, another one for yourself. I put a lot of pressure on myself back in the day, let's say. or at the beginning of my journey to learn about how to change. I had so many expectations. We mentioned it a bit earlier. You're in a new country. Am I going to go back and fail? Am I going to be able to survive financially? Am I, all of these uncertain things play a big role in sort of being stressed. And that's why I think it's insidious, because it's there in the background, but you're not constantly thinking about it. And so, the irritability starts, but then so does the sort of isolation or, like I said, the not wanting to be in social situations or with friends or partners.
And also at work, right?
Yeah, at work. Definitely at work. I didn't want to speak to anyone.
Oh, wow.
I was like, I'm going to put my headphones on and just work. And in the end, it's not sustainable.
Would there be a way that people around you could have approached you if they would notice, hey, Maxine just comes here with headphones and then she leaves and that's it? Like that. Looking back, what could have been a way that somebody could have entered a bubble, so to say?
I think you work together every day.
Yes.
You have so much relationships and connections with people. I think I was such a bubbly person. If I'd have noticed someone that came in and said hi to everyone, was always there, was always active, was always involved, if they suddenly started to be quiet, I think I would have took them aside and said, is everything okay?
Yeah. But for you, you are the bubbly person.
Exactly.
So you were still being bubbly, but putting your headphones on and isolating.
Exactly. So maybe people didn't notice.
Yeah.
I think now also after working and being in culture management, what I was delivering during leadership training was that you have these check-ins with the people that you work with, and especially the high achievers, because what happens mainly is that the high achievers get all the workload because they're doing so well. I mean, actually, it's quite a sensitive issue, because I'm saying that you should reach out to people that you see their actions change or their emotions change. However, sometimes you might approach people and they say everything's fine. And so how do you go from there? Or, they tell you something in confidence, but you can't actually make a change or do anything about it because it's kind of out of your control. I think the biggest thing is that I felt like I just wanted support. I needed people to actively listen to me, to make me feel not so alone. I needed that trust. And even though I'd reached out to a few people, they weren't really in the position of power to help. And so that's why I think there should always be a cheerleader or a mentor that you can go to in these situations, and not just HR, and maybe not even your own manager. There should be a person that you can trust in companies that you can go to.
That's a role, actually, in Netherlands.
Yes,
the trust person.
The vertrouwens person. Yeah. Although I've never seen it personally. I was that person in my last company.
Oh, really?
As part of my role as culture manager. I mean, I also think I took on that. I also took on extra work because I was so excited about this role, being able to use all of my skills and all of my passion and my values of like, how can I make change?
Yes.
And I think we'll talk about it also later in part 2. Sometimes there's not a team around you to help you action your vision. And that's sometimes where the systemic issues come from. But we'll talk about that later.
So Maxine, and you were living through all of that, being a woman of color, as you say, being different. Can you share with me that experience? How is it for you? How has it been?
Yeah. So again, I grew up in this town in the UK and in the south of the UK. And I knew I was different, but I didn't really know why.
Okay.
And someone asked the other day, like, when did you realize that you were like a woman of color or black, And it was when I moved into London, actually. And it was such a big city, but people were asking, like, which box do I put myself in? And I was like, what do you mean, which box? I'm just Maxine.
Yes.
And so
that's how it should be,
right? And so I'd never felt like that. Of course, there were things when I was growing up that you these microaggressions that you later on think about and you're like, oh, that did happen. But there was no clear line that I was different until I moved. And it was in a work situation. So it was very much, I had to be in a certain way. I had to wear a suit. I was very, very professional. I didn't really make friends at work. I just focused on going into work. And that's just how it was. And then when I moved here, that was the shift, that actually people were much more community focused, like much more friendly in that environment. And I started to feel that I could be a bit open. However, there were instances of of, I don't know the word for it, but of discrimination, of microaggressions and unconscious bias. Because again, I don't feel like any of these people actually knew that they were doing these things. But I do feel like there were certain mistreatments in terms of like work. You know, someone could come in late and nothing was said. I would come in late and I was, you know, reprimanded. And so these small microaggressions start to cut like a knife. And I never wanted to say it's because I'm a woman, it's because I'm a Black woman or a woman of color.
Because that often does not go well. If you speak up, oh, that's because I'm a woman, that's because I'm a person of color. It's who believes you?
And there was a lot of invalidation also from people I knew, like this happened at work. So it goes back to this kind of communication spiral, like who can you trust? So I'd say, well, this happened. They didn't mean it like that, you know?
And do you think like having somebody to trust who also you can relate to experience-wise, we already go a little bit into the DEI topic, but that is important, right?
Yeah, that's why representation matters, you know? I think to see someone that looks like you, that understands the situations you've been in, is really, really important. I mean, I often used to be the only woman in the room and also the only Black woman in the room.
Oh.
And again, for me, it was never a chip on my shoulder. I was like, great, I'm here. What can we do? Yeah. But at a certain point, it starts to feel like you're constantly fighting. You're constantly on edge. You're constantly kind of looking out for kind of ways that you're not safe because you don't feel safe eventually in those situations.
In Brazil, it's also a big thing of many, many people, I think especially women as well, realizing that they are Black so late in life. There is a book I read that so long ago where she's telling her experience. I think the book's called When I Understood I'm Black. She was 30 and somebody told her, oh, do you want to join this group of Black women? She was like, what do you mean?
What's going on?
Yes. And of course that the world should be a place where it doesn't matter that we have to put ourselves in boxes. But then, like you said, you're confronted in a way that which box do you belong to? Which is that box?
Yeah.
And then we are forced to, but also we notice, oh, the treatment is different. Oh, is this because what I hear so many people saying that people from different heritage, people who are from a different culture, from a different skin color, they are treated differently. Is that now what's happening to me? So it's almost inevitable to ask yourself those questions.
Yeah, like I said, when I first went through this unconscious bias training, I was so shocked at my own biases. That started me off on this personal journey. And I'm of mixed heritage, so my mother's Black, my father's white. And so you're also in these two institutions. Yeah. So where do you really fit in? Because also when I moved to London, I wasn't Black enough, let's say, to hang out with the Black girls. And that's what I was told. And there was a lot of colorism in terms of that. And then, of course, the reason why I say I'm Black, because someone might say, well, you're brown or you don't experience the same thing. I would say I'm Black because I'm not considered white and I'm not put into those white situations. But I'm often treated a little bit more friendlier because, you know, someone said to me once, oh, you're so international. You could fit into, you know, anywhere. And I was like, I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
It is so weird. I just blend in somehow. People can think I'm Italian, that I am French, that I am like almost from anywhere. Then they could also think, oh, maybe, you know, there's this maybe. So there is one thing about passé, but that also then we get a bit conflicted, or I get a little bit conflicted myself and thinking, no, but what is then my identity?
Yes.
What is that one thing that I claim for? No, this is me. Because actually, if I was living in Germany for 10 years, I spoke perfect German. The accent was so on point at some point that people just assume I'm German. But my grandmother was black indigenous.
Yeah.
But it is a weird thing of being able to pass, and at the same time, no, but you are different. When we can say, for example, oh, Brazilian, you're too emotional, then those things might get played against us.
Exactly. And I think identity is a huge point there, because who you are and who you present to the world often sometimes gets masked because you don't know how you'll be perceived or treated by the status quo, the people that are already in these positions of power, the people that already have these roles. So you also go into an environment That's not essentially, like I said, there's not a lot of representation, but you are, you deserve to be there.
Absolutely.
You're worthy to be there because you worked hard, and yeah, everyone deserves that as well.
Absolutely. How do you feel today about working hard? Because it's a big one, right?
It is. I mean, I also would like to say that I got diagnosed with ADHD
Okay.
2 years ago. And I think that's
2 years ago.
that's had
recent.
a huge impact on also the realization that, maybe the reason why I didn't fit into the system was also because of that.
Wow.
The intersectionality of it. But also people with ADHD burn out more than others because I realize that my head is always going. I'm always giving 100% to a project. I've always got that high energy when I walk into a room. I'm always problem solving. There's also a lot of great things about, this label of ADHD. Yeah. However, I think that it was a cause to kind of burn out more.
All these symptoms you were telling us, you spot the situation, you talk to some people, but how do you actually overcome it? How did you get out?
It was a hard hole, to climb out of. It was quite dark. I think I was just so scared that I would stay there forever, which was in a place of disappointment. I was so disappointment. I felt, like I said the word earlier, I felt a little bit betrayed by the system because I have worked so hard over the last 20 years. I have moved to a new country. I have been successful in, starting my own business. And I had 2 businesses, so one before COVID and then the one I'm running now. But the one before, I had to stop during COVID, and then I got this other job. So I mean, I'm really proud of these things that have been sort of happening. Yeah. But the way I got out of it and going back to breaking oppression with joy is that I really had to stop and be like, who am I without work? Who am I as a person? What's my identity? Because I've just been working since I could, As soon as you go on that path, you leave school, you get told this is what you need to do. And that's it. And you keep going without kind of stopping or thinking or being redirected. So I was like, who am I without work? What do I enjoy doing? I did The Artist's Way. I don't know if you've read
please
it.
tell me.
So The Artist's Way is a 12-week self-course.
Okay.
And you have to write 3 pages every day. It doesn't matter if you're a writer or not. And I think people often mistake themselves and say, well, I'm not creative. I think everyone's creative deep down.
Yeah,
right?
We're humans. We have
You can even be creative with numbers. It's not me, but you can be creative with numbers, right? So it tells you, like, when was the first time someone blocked your creativity? Was it an art teacher? Was it your parents, Did they tell you drawing is, that's not going to make you money. You have to get a proper job, whatever that is. So it breaks down all these mental barriers and it says, just do things for fun. Take yourself out on an artist date once a week, just by yourself. Go for a walk to a gallery, all these things. And so you start to experience joy. Yeah. And trying drawing again. I was like, I remember I liked drawing when I was younger. Things we don't do as adults. This stressful world that we live in, we often forget that these outlets, because we don't have time, are actually the ones that give us our joy. And so I started drawing again and actually realized I can actually draw and it's fun. And it doesn't have to be a job. Yeah. These hobbies don't have to be anything. I started baking. It teaches you all these kind of things. And I was like, I'm not, I can't bake. I started singing lessons, and that actually is helping me with vocal when I'm moderating, when I'm hosting events, when I'm hosting, work events. It actually helps you with your posture and all this sort of stuff. So these bits can actually filter into your daily life. And I think I did it twice because I was like, the first time I rushed through it because I was desperate for creativity. And the second time I was more conscious about it, but it helped me redirect things really well. And I mean, I think burnout, you need to take action. And even when you cannot get out of bed, which I experienced, I did not want to get out of bed. I did not want to see anyone. I just really slowly started just doing things for myself and putting myself first and saying only yes to things that I felt gave me the right energy. And it's taken me 3 or 4 years, I think also you try and rush through it. I try and rush through healing. I'm trying to do everything. I'm very lucky that I had access to a therapist as well.
Nice.
Not a lot of people have that. And again, I think living here, again, I want people to listen and sort of be like, it's accessible to everyone to make these small steps if they're experiencing these things. I think I would say even before it gets to that bad of not being getting out of bed, is to recognizing your patterns. Like I said, it's sleep. Are you constantly being stressed? Are you being irritable to your loved ones? And take yourself away, not on just a holiday, but really sit with yourself and be like, what's going on?
A creative date, or how did you call it?
Yeah, an artist date. Yeah.
And okay, how is that? What did you do?
So, I mean, it's also a bit scary, right?
Okay.
So it makes you list 20 things that you wish you could do, but you think you're too old for, maybe.
Ooh.
So I was like roller skating. Yeah, horse riding I used to do when I was younger.
Yeah.
All these things you do as kids. That's how you grow. Singing, writing. I love writing. And just setting yourself these little goals. And the first couple of weeks, I just was so scared to do them. I didn't do them. Take yourself to a bookstore, which I did. You don't have to buy anything,
Exactly.
I always have this thing where I think I have to do something, or it has to be like this perfect thing, and it does not have to be perfect.
What I learned was also a therapist who told me,
Yeah.
because I would tell her my feelings, how I'm doing, everything, and she picked up on something that I would say very often, I have to, I have to. And she was like, how far you say a lot?
Yeah.
I have to.
Yeah.
Try to shift. And when you are doing something, even if it's something pleasurable that you want to do, instead of, I have to go to this course, I have to go to this, or I have to practice, shift that, I want to.
Yes.
I want to go to the bookstore. I want to have a look. It's not,
I want to be curious.
Yeah. I have to read all of the books because there is so much there. If you just think like that, the pressure in your head is so high because that's just impossible, and it will always be overwhelming. But if you shift, I want to know what is in the know right now. I want to know what is like trendy right now. Then it's just like, if we stumble upon one thing, that it can already satisfy yourself.
I love that, because actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like a lot of women say things like, I should, I just want to, but like all of these things, especially in email communication, especially when I was working in corporates, like when you're asking things, it's can you just help me quickly? It's about saying to yourself, like you said, being curious and saying, I have just said it myself. I'm going to start, even if it's for 5 minutes. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to take myself, out of the situation, or put myself into a creative situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So good. Okay, so you started taking yourself to those dates?
Yes, my artist dates.
Oh, and how did it go?
I really started to enjoy life again, because I was also, again, focused, what's my next step in work?
Yes, exactly.
Not in life. Like, how am I going to cope with going back into, a company? Because a lot of the times, again, this is radical self-awareness, is that you look at others and it's a human nature to kind of blame the situation you're in. But actually what I had to do was internalize, how did I get there? Did I not have my boundaries? Did I not learn how to say no? And I think I was never taught when I was growing up, what boundaries were, what my needs were, what my wants were. And again, don't know if you're a woman or it could be anyone. But I really was shocked to discover, like, I didn't know. So I had to ask myself these questions. So then as an entrepreneur, you can start to see yourself going down these routes again of being too hard on yourself, trying to do everything all at once, not asking for help, isolating yourself, thinking that you're the only one going through this alone. And, I started to recognize these things and then be like, right, okay, now I have to like sit back and take stock or go and do something fun. Yeah.
So good. But, it's a moment to rediscover ourselves and also think, actually, when I speak about myself, I'm Rafaela, I'm a manager of something. No, that's not who I am. This is something that I am doing as my work. But discovering, okay, who do we want to be as people? And not setting this crazy goal of, if I don't go up in my career, in my company, that means that me as a person, I didn't develop. No, wrong. You can develop with your in your own self
Yes.
and with the things that you decide to.
Yeah. Actually, we're often taught, and I feel like this is also especially true in the US, to constantly be selling yourself, to constantly have your elevator pitch ready, to constantly be saying, actually, who am I? So, I was thinking about it today. If you asked me, would I say actually my job title?
Yeah.
Or would I say who I am?
No, right.
And I was like, I would be called a vibe curator. I would be community builder. I would be storyteller. That's who I am as a person. And I went to an event recently as well, and it was this networking event. And I often think I don't like to ask, what do you do at networking event? I like to ask other questions. But someone said, if they could remember you by one thing, what would it be? Like, okay.
And what would that be for you?
Mine would be, I would like people to remember me for bringing people together. I think I experienced true joy in making other people, connecting other people.
So nice.
Yeah.
And how you use that in one specific moment of your life as your work is your decision. At one point as a executive assistant, you were probably doing that, right? And then now as an entrepreneur with your own companies, you're also doing that.
Yeah.
But that is secondary. The main thing is that what you love to do.
Exactly. Your purpose in life.
Yes, your purpose. Did you find that through that journey, the artistic journey?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obsessed actually with self-development and learning, all the books. At one point my therapist was like, you're okay, like, get over it. Like, nothing's wrong.
You developed.
Yeah, exactly. Like, no, don't find any more problems. You're okay. I'm like, what about this? She's like, no. And I was actually watching a TED talk, and it was this guy, and he's called Adam Leipzig, and he said, I can tell you your life's purpose in 5 questions in 5 minutes. I was like, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
And he said, I spent a lot of time with people over 20 years. I went to university, they've studied, and if I ask them the simple question, what's your purpose? They still have no idea. Yeah. So he said, what is your name? What do you like to do? What are you qualified to do?
That's the third question.
No. That was the second one.
Okay.
Yeah. Who do you do it for?
Okay.
Why do you do it? And how does it make you feel?
Oh.
And I was like, okay. And he's like, it should be quick, just shout it out. Yeah. So like, what's your name?
Okay.
Yeah. What do you like to do? And I was like, I love to talk to people. I love to listen to everyone's stories. What do you feel qualified to do? And I feel qualified to talk to people and listen and collect that information and share knowledge. Who do you do it for? Friends, family, people that I work with. Yeah. And how does it make you feel? It makes me feel, accomplished. I love helping people feel understood. And that's the why, bringing people together.
You mentioned before you were isolating yourself and the loneliness aspect. So you're in this journey now of figuring out, this is the Maxine.
Yes.
These are the things that I love to do. Picking up stuff that you used to do as a kid, which is so wonderful. But how did you then navigate the loneliness, maybe that the burnout brought you from isolating yourself from your colleagues, right?
Yes, yeah.
You mentioned when we were talking earlier that, somebody goes on a burnout and they simply disappear.
Completely disappear. I overheard someone saying the other day, this girl, she just went on burnout. And I have to now find someone else in the company. I think at the beginning, very much isolating myself. But then as soon as I started to discover the joy of doing all these things, like I said, breaking oppression through joy, I actually wanted to focus so much on doing those amazing things. I almost was isolating myself because I was like, I've wasted so much time on being stressed. I've wasted so much time on being unhappy. I've wasted so much time on, these institutions. And again, I'm not dissing any institutions. Everyone has a choice, but I think I was so passionate about finding something new that I almost did the same thing. But then I started to discover that if I shared it with friends, that it brought more joy, and also it gives people the knowledge that they can also experience joy. And then you hear the other stories, because you do look around sometimes, or I did, and was like, there's no one else feeling like this.
Right.
I discovered a lot of people were holding those things in.
Absolutely.
Or I also didn't realize that this was it, that it was a burnout, or that I was experiencing symptoms of stress. Because once I learned it, I was like, everyone's got to know. Everyone's got to know. And I'm like, saying, be careful and all these sort of stuff and hearing stories. But I mean, it goes back into kind of being that empath where you're, I don't want to overstep my boundaries with other people. But I was like, if I recognize that in myself, then I also recognize that in you.
Absolutely. And especially for managers, right? They also have to have that that eye. Okay, how are people doing? It's not that, oh, they're so good, they just take more and more and more and more.
Yeah. Look out for the team members that are quiet. You know, also give people the trust that you would your high-performing team members.
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. You mentioned yourself, you're a bubbly person, full of energy. I myself also am like that. I find it very, very hard to go into a space and not almost feeling the responsibility of the energy of the space. I learned that actually does cost me if I don't have that energy myself. If I have it, doing that gives me back energy. So I can, I love to see how people are smiling or they're feeling well because I brought that energy in. I love that.
Actually, I mean, I used to have this nickname that I was called Party Max. So I'd get invited to all these events, all these networking events, because I would just bring this energy into the room. And there was a point where I was like, I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be the person sitting in the corner of the room having deep conversations.
Yeah.
I also don't want the expectations that if you invite me, that I'm going to make your day or your event better. But there was this kind of responsibility. I think that's maybe what you felt, this responsibility to bring this energy and light. But that's when I had energy. And I think after the burnout, my energy, you have to check in with yourself, because if I'm at 75%, it could go down to 50, and then it could go down to like 25 or nothing, where that's where I'm like, I'm in bed for 2 days. So I'm like at 75%, do I have the energy to give this to people? What is going to give me energy now? Is it reading? Is it resting? Is it, being in a social situation? Because I can still get energy from the right social situations.
Yes.
But I also realize that it's almost a bit of a trauma response. Everyone's responsible for themselves. And I don't have to satisfy this urge to feel comfortable, to make others feel comfortable when I'm in the room. And even though I still get joy of being that person, I have to be really wary of when and where I do it. I mean, actually, my therapist, not to quote her again,
please, look what
she was like, why are you giving 100% to every single situation?
Right.
And I was like, true. It was like, even if it's, going to the shop, it's 100%. It could just be like, I want to get dressed in my, tracksuit and go to the shop. It doesn't have to be a whole journey there. We're like, going on these artist dates. It doesn't have to be perfect for it to be something. Going to the bookstore, it doesn't have to be that you're going to sit in there for 2 hours and read a book in the cafe. So, where are you giving it energy, and why are you giving it so much energy? And I always thought that if I didn't give it enough energy, that I was also failing, or that, I wasn't passionate enough, and that's not true. I think other people also don't give 100% all the time. No. And that's where I kind of realized that there was a difference.
Wow, I love that. Maxine, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We spoke a little bit about being a woman of color, navigating, working in big companies like that. So let's shift in the next part to the structural part and what's DEI. Maybe to give a little bit of a teaser. What is your hot take on DEI?
My hot take?
Yes.
Is that it was never called DEI, and it shouldn't be called DEI, because it should be intrinsically within you, inside and outside of work, to make sure that your life is accessible and as inclusive as possible to the people around you. We live in an ableist society, so let's make sure that we're being inclusive of everyone.
More on the next episode. Thank you for watching and thank you for joining me. I'm Rafaela Buena and this was Street Smarts directly from Amsterdam. This was part 1 of my talk with Maxine Penney. Now go and watch episode 2, part 2 of this talk with her, and we're gonna dive into DEI. Why is it actually set to fail from the beginning, and what can we do to do differently now that the world is actually heading towards a different direction? So see you there, subscribe to Street Smarts, and see you next time.